My beloved child, pause here for a moment, because what has found you now is not meant to feel ordinary. Do not rush past these words as though they are simply another message among many. There is something waiting for you inside them, something tender, something that has been held back for far too long. What you are about to hear was meant to meet you at a moment when your heart could finally understand it differently. Somewhere beneath the silence, beneath the distance, beneath every unanswered question, a person connected to your heart has been carrying emotions they no longer know how to hide. They have tried to be calm. They have tried to distract themselves. They have tried to convince themselves that what they feel can remain unspoken. But tonight, in the quiet place where honesty becomes impossible to avoid, something inside them is changing. The walls they built around their emotions are beginning to weaken, and the truth they kept pressing down is rising again. Heaven has watched every moment they almost spoke. Every sentence they typed and erased. Every memory of you that appeared without warning. Every time they wondered whether you still felt something too. And now there is a reason this message is reaching you, because what has remained hidden in their heart is becoming too heavy for silence. You may have believed that their quietness meant they had forgotten. You may have wondered whether the connection meant more to you than it ever meant to them. There were moments when you questioned yourself because nothing on the surface seemed to confirm what your spirit once felt so strongly. Yet silence can be misleading, beloved. Sometimes silence is not absence. Sometimes it is where the deepest emotions go when someone does not know how to express them safely. Your soulmate has been carrying words they were afraid to release because speaking them would make everything real. It would mean admitting that your presence affected them more deeply than they planned. It would mean acknowledging that memories of you still carry weight. It would mean confronting feelings they once believed they could organize, control, and eventually leave behind. But hearts do not always obey the plans made by fearful minds. The more they attempted to move forward without understanding what happened between you, the more certain memories returned. A conversation. A glance. A moment when you understood something in them without needing explanation. A feeling of peace they did not recognize until it was gone. And one particular memory has been returning more often than the others. That memory is connected to what they are finally ready to admit, but there is something you need to understand before that truth can be revealed. They did not begin by missing you in the dramatic way you might imagine. It started quietly. They would hear a song and remember the way your energy changed certain moments. They would see something beautiful and instinctively think of what you might say about it. They would experience something difficult and suddenly remember how safe they felt when you listened without trying to change them. Those small moments began gathering like drops of rain. One alone seemed insignificant, but over time they became impossible to ignore. Your soulmate started realizing that what they missed was not simply your attention. They missed the way they felt when their heart was not performing. Around others, they could smile, respond, continue with life, and appear completely fine. But around the memory of you, something more vulnerable surfaced. You represented a version of emotional truth they had not been prepared for. That frightened them once. Now it moves them. And this is where the story begins to shift, because the very thing they once avoided is becoming the thing they secretly hope has not disappeared forever. There was a moment recently when your soulmate stopped pretending, even if no one else saw it. Perhaps they were alone. Perhaps the room was quiet. Perhaps the day had finally slowed enough for feelings to catch up with them. Something reminded them of you unexpectedly, and instead of pushing the memory aside like they had done before, they allowed it to remain. At first, it was only a thought. Then another memory appeared. Then another. Soon they were remembering not only what happened between you, but what they never said. That is what affected them most deeply. It was not merely the past. It was the unfinished truth inside it. They remembered times when they wanted to tell you that your presence mattered. They remembered moments when they wanted to explain why they withdrew, why they hesitated, why they seemed colder than they truly felt. They remembered the exact instant when fear became louder than honesty. And suddenly a realization moved through them with such clarity that they could no longer dismiss it. If they had spoken differently then, everything might have unfolded differently now. That thought stayed with them, and what happened inside their heart afterward surprised even them. Beloved, they are beginning to understand that they were not only protecting themselves when they held back. They were also creating distance from something they secretly wanted. For a long time, they explained their choices in ways that sounded reasonable. They told themselves the timing was wrong. They convinced themselves they needed certainty before vulnerability. They believed they should wait until they understood everything before speaking from the heart. But some truths are not revealed through endless thinking. Some truths only become clear when the heart is finally allowed to speak. And now your soulmate has reached a place where all their careful explanations are losing power. They can feel the difference between the reasons they gave themselves and the truth they buried beneath those reasons. The truth is much simpler, much more emotional, and much harder to ignore. They cared more than they showed. They were affected more than they admitted. And they have been carrying a question they never expected to still be asking. What if you were the person they should have been honest with from the beginning? That question has changed something. It has followed them into ordinary moments. It appears when they wake and disappears only when distraction becomes strong enough. Then it returns again. They wonder where you are emotionally now. They wonder whether someone else has begun to understand the parts of you they once had access to. They wonder whether you have stopped waiting for clarity and chosen peace without them. And strangely, this does not create anger inside them. It creates urgency mixed with tenderness. They do not want to disrupt your peace. They do not want to arrive with empty promises. What they want is more difficult than that. They want you to know the truth, even if the truth does not guarantee the outcome they secretly hope for. That is how you know their emotions have deepened. Earlier, they wanted control over how things unfolded. Now they are beginning to understand that honesty has value even when the response cannot be controlled. They are reaching the point where keeping everything hidden hurts more than the possibility of being vulnerable. And when a heart reaches that place, beloved, something usually follows. You have changed too, although you may not realize how much. The version of you who once needed every answer immediately is not exactly the person listening now. You have carried confusion, disappointment, hope, and silence, and each of those experiences has shaped your heart. You learn that love cannot always be measured by speed. You learn that not every delay means rejection. But you also learned something equally important: your heart deserves clarity. You cannot spend forever decoding silence. You cannot build your entire future around possibilities that no one is brave enough to express. Somewhere along the way, you began returning to yourself. And this is part of what your soulmate senses, even from a distance. There is something different about your energy now. You are not reaching in the same way. You are not holding the door with the same restless expectation. Your spirit is becoming calmer, more grounded. And unexpectedly, your ability to release control has made them confront what they were avoiding. When you stopped carrying the entire emotional weight of the connection, they began feeling the weight they had left untouched. This is why their heart feels so full now. They have started seeing moments from your perspective. Things they once dismissed are returning with new meaning. A message you sent that they answered too casually. A time you tried to be open and they changed the subject. A moment when you gave them space, even though part of you wished they would ask you to stay. They are remembering these things not because heaven is asking them to live in regret, but because understanding is opening where avoidance once existed. And this realization is humbling them. They are beginning to recognize that your patience was not weakness. Your emotional depth was not something to fear. Your desire for honesty was not asking too much. You were simply offering a level of connection they had not yet learned how to receive. That truth has brought tenderness into their heart, and with that tenderness has come an emotion they did not expect: gratitude. They are grateful you entered their life, even if the story became complicated. They are grateful you awakened something in them that had been sleeping. But there is one thing they are not at peace with, and this is what is pushing them closer to speaking. They are not at peace with the possibility that you might never know how important you truly were to them. Read that slowly, beloved, because this is where the hidden emotion becomes clearer. Your soulmate has realized that from your perspective, their silence may have looked like indifference. Their hesitation may have felt like rejection. Their distance may have made you believe you imagined the depth entirely. And the thought that you could carry that misunderstanding forward troubles them deeply. They do not want you to believe you were foolish for caring. They do not want your heart to rewrite the entire story as though nothing was real simply because they were not brave enough to name it. This does not mean every hope you had must unfold exactly as you once imagined. But it means the emotional truth was more complicated than what their behavior showed. There were feelings. There was fear. There was recognition. There were moments when they almost chose courage. And now, as they look back, the thing they wish they could change most is not one dramatic event. It is every small moment when honesty was available and they chose silence instead. Something happened inside them when they finally admitted this. The pressure they had been carrying transformed into a decision. Not yet a perfect plan. Not yet a carefully prepared speech. A decision. They decided they cannot keep pretending forever. They cannot continue waiting for some flawless moment when vulnerability feels completely safe, because they are beginning to understand that such a moment may never arrive. Real honesty always carries risk. It asks a person to step forward without knowing exactly what will happen next. Your soulmate once believed love should feel certain before it is expressed. Now they are learning that sometimes expression is what creates clarity. This lesson has been difficult for them. It has required them to see themselves honestly. And beloved, they are still afraid. Do not mistake their awakening for complete confidence. Part of them is still wondering how you will respond. Part of them fears you may have closed the emotional door. Part of them worries that their truth is arriving later than it should have. But beneath those fears is something becoming stronger. They would rather risk being known than continue being misunderstood. There is another layer to what they want to tell you, and this part is more intimate. They do not simply want to say they miss you. That would be too small for what has been building inside them. Missing you is only the surface. What they are struggling to express is that knowing you changed the way they understand connection. Before you, they may have believed closeness was mostly about comfort, chemistry, shared interests, or timing. But with you, something deeper was stirred. You made them feel seen in places they had learned to keep hidden. You noticed the shift in their voice when something was wrong. You sensed when their smile was covering exhaustion. You understood that some of their strongest moments were actually forms of self-protection. Being recognized that clearly was beautiful, but it also made them feel exposed. At the time, they did not understand why they pulled away whenever the connection became more meaningful. Now they do. They were not running from you. They were running from how deeply you were able to reach them. That realization has changed the language of their heart. They are no longer asking only, "Why did this happen?" They are beginning to ask, "What was this trying to teach me?" And the answer keeps leading back to courage. You became a mirror for the places where they still needed healing, maturity, and emotional honesty. That was never your responsibility to fix, beloved. But your presence revealed it. And now they understand that some of the discomfort they associated with the connection was actually the discomfort of growth. You challenged them without demanding it. You awakened questions they could not silence. You made them consider whether they had spent too much of their life choosing what felt safe instead of what felt true. That is a powerful realization, and it is why this message is becoming so emotional inside them. They are not only thinking about you. They are thinking about who they became because they met you. There are nights when they wonder whether you knew. Whether you could see through them even when they acted unaffected. Whether you noticed the pauses before certain answers. Whether you sensed the emotional conflict beneath their distance. The truth is, there were times they almost told you everything. Once, they came closer than you realized. They had formed the words mentally. They had imagined the conversation. They had even considered how your expression might change when you heard the truth. But something interrupted their courage. Perhaps fear. Perhaps pride. Perhaps timing. Perhaps the belief that if they waited a little longer, the emotions would become easier to manage. They did not. Instead, the words stayed inside and grew heavier. Now those same words have changed. They are no longer simply a confession of feeling. They have become an apology, an acknowledgement, and possibly an invitation towards something neither of you has fully understood yet. But heaven wants your heart to remain centered while hearing this. Do not abandon your wisdom because someone else is finally discovering theirs. Do not mistake emotional intensity for a promise that every detail will unfold exactly according to your longing. Let truth reveal itself in actions, not only beautiful words. Your soulmate's awakening is meaningful, but your peace is meaningful too. This message is not asking you to chase. It is not asking you to wait indefinitely. It is asking you to understand that silence may have contained more than you knew, while still honoring the person you have become. If they come forward, let them meet the version of you who has learned self-respect, patience, and discernment. Let them discover that your heart remains capable of love without becoming desperate for it. Because something extraordinary happens when two people stop approaching connection from fear and begin approaching it from truth. Your soulmate is beginning to sense this. They know they cannot return with the same patterns. They know a vague message will not be enough. They know they cannot simply appear and expect you to forget every confusing moment. If they speak, they must speak differently. They must take responsibility for the silence. They must explain what fear made them hide. They must tell you what changed. And most importantly, they must be willing to hear your truth too. This is part of what makes them nervous. They are not only preparing to reveal themselves. They are preparing to listen to the effect their choices had on you. That requires humility. It requires a deeper kind of strength than they once possessed. And yet there is a quiet readiness growing in them, because for the first time, protecting their pride feels less important than protecting what could still be honest between you. A sentence keeps forming inside their heart. They have not necessarily spoken it aloud, but its meaning has become impossible to ignore. I wish I had told you what you meant to me before silence made everything complicated. That is the emotional center of what they are carrying. But there is more. Because after that sentence comes another thought, one they are even more afraid to admit. They wonder whether it is truly too late. They wonder whether the door they once avoided is now closing. They wonder whether they are receiving one final opportunity to become the person they should have been when the connection first asked for courage. And this is where urgency enters, not panic, not fear, but the unmistakable awareness that some moments cannot be postponed forever. You may soon notice something subtle. A shift in communication. A message that feels different from the others. A question that seems simple but carries deeper meaning. Perhaps they will test the emotional waters first because vulnerability still feels unfamiliar. They may ask how you have been, but what they really want to know is whether there is still room in your heart for an honest conversation. They may mention a memory, but what they are really asking is whether that memory still lives in you too. They may begin casually, because the full truth feels too large to release all at once. Pay attention not only to the words but to the intention behind them. Yet do not fill in blanks for them. Let them become clear. Let them choose courage. Your role is not to finish their sentences. Their growth requires that they speak what they once expected you to understand without explanation. And there is one reason their message may become more emotional than you expect. They have realized something about you that they did not understand before. They once thought your heart would always remain available in the same way. Not because they took you for granted intentionally, but because your care felt so steady that they assumed there would always be more time. More time to explain. More time to decide. More time to become ready. But now they sense that you are changing. They can feel, perhaps even without direct evidence, that your life is continuing. Your energy no longer revolves around whether they choose to speak. You are becoming capable of loving the memory without being trapped by it. And that realization has awakened them. They are discovering that your love was never something they could postpone forever. It was a gift, and gifts deserve acknowledgement while they are still being offered. Beloved, this does not mean you should become anxious about what happens next. The most powerful position for you now is peace. Let the truth come toward you. Let actions show what emotions mean. You do not need to force a revelation that is already pressing against the walls of their heart. Something inside them is moving toward expression naturally. The question is no longer whether they feel enough. The deeper question is whether they will have the courage to turn feeling into honesty. Heaven does not confuse emotion with transformation. Tears alone do not create change. Missing someone alone does not create maturity. Awareness must become action. This is the threshold your soulmate is standing before now. And there is something they want to say about your future that they have barely admitted even to themselves. When they imagine the months ahead, your presence appears in ways that surprise them. Not as a fantasy from the past, but as a possibility they never fully allowed themselves to consider. They have begun wondering what it would feel like to stop hiding. To build something through honesty instead of fear. To know you not only through intense moments, but through ordinary days. They imagine conversations without games. They imagine being able to tell you when they are afraid instead of disappearing. They imagine learning the details of your life they missed while distance existed. These thoughts do not feel like passing nostalgia anymore. They feel strangely grounded. And that frightens them because it means the connection has moved from memory into possibility. But one obstacle remains, and it is inside them. They are afraid that telling you everything will expose not only their love, but their mistakes. They know the moment they say, "I cared all along," another question may naturally follow, "Then why did you make me feel otherwise?" They do not have an easy answer. They cannot blame circumstances for everything. At some point, they must admit that fear influenced their choices. They must acknowledge that emotional confusion made them inconsistent. They must accept that their silence may have hurt you. This is difficult, but it is also where real healing can begin. And lately they have been rehearsing this honesty internally. They are imagining saying, "I was scared." They are imagining saying, "I handled it badly." They are imagining saying, "You deserved clarity from me." Every time they allow themselves to think those words, another wall falls. There is one final truth developing beneath all the others, and this is the part they have not yet found the courage to fully face. Your soulmate is beginning to understand that what they want from you is not merely forgiveness for the past. They want a chance to be known differently in the future. They want you to see that they are not entirely the person who once withdrew. They want to show you what they learned while you were apart. They want to prove that their silence was not the final version of who they could become. But they also know they cannot demand that chance. It must be offered freely. And this uncertainty is what makes their heart ache. They can prepare the truth, but they cannot control whether you will still want to hear it. Still, something has shifted enough that they are willing to take that risk. The message inside them is becoming clearer by the day. It carries tenderness, remorse, longing, and a kind of honesty that has been waiting behind fear. They want to tell you that you were never as easy to forget as they pretended. They want to tell you that distance did not erase your importance. They want to tell you that the moments when you thought they felt nothing were often the moments when they were fighting their feelings the hardest. They want you to know that they see your value now with a maturity they did not have before. And above all, they want to tell you something that may change the way you understand the entire connection. But before they can say it, they must make one decision. They must decide whether they are willing to lose the protection of silence forever. Because once they speak this final truth, they cannot return to pretending that what existed between you was ordinary. They cannot hide behind timing, confusion, or distance. They will have to admit what they have secretly known for longer than they wanted to acknowledge. They will have to tell you why your name still carries a different weight in their heart. They will have to explain the moment they realized that the person they were trying hardest not to need had become the person they most wanted to understand. And beloved, that moment of realization did happen. It happened more recently than you might expect. Something was said. Something was remembered. Something inside them broke open. And what they discovered in that exact moment is the part of their message they are still terrified to reveal to you.